Hi, everyone. I'm Shelley, and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another reading from the Iron Republic. This is the second last chapter. It's chapter 12, so I hope you enjoy it. We must have been 1,500 feet above the earth, and from that high altitude had a most magnificent view. Mountains could be seen in the blue distance, and rivers winding through sunny fields with here and there a lake that flashed like silver. Many towns and villages were visible from where we floated high up in midair. Trains of cars far below us looked like great black jointed worms crawling swiftly along the earth, and the crispness of the rarefied atmosphere would have chilled us but for the exercise of driving the great double aeroplane. It was exhilarating to the highest degree as we swung around in great ascending circles, or hurtled quivering down through the air in long toboggan slides, to leap up again as though sprung from a catapult when the steering fan was dipped. Helen Morris never looked more beautiful than as we swung side by side under the aeroplane and surveyed the panorama of the earth below. During the year of our acquaintance, I had made no more progress in loving or love making than on the first day we met. Always kind, sympathetic, sometimes always tender, she nevertheless held me at a worshipful distance, never repulsing, but always repressing me in a way that convinced me that my suit was not disagreeable, but hopeless. No slighting reference had been made to Professor Hallam since the day when, in her impetuous argument with her father, she sneered at the fiddlers of Ironia, and indeed her conduct afterward indicated repentance for her hasty and unjust words, for in her subsequent manner toward him in my presence she seemed desirous to make atonement by being especially kind. She was interested in me, that I was sure of, and when I achieved some notoriety by winning the somewhat famous gang plow case against the state, and began to be talked about as the brilliant attorney from America, her elation was so sincere and apparent as to give me the hope that I had won two suits at the same time. But when I would have improved the occasion to press my claim for her heart and hand, she protested, declaring with tears that I gave her great pain, and begged me to desist. Notwithstanding, she seemed to be happier with me than with Professor Hallam, and I reached the conclusion after close observation that her hand had been promised to him, and she was too proud or too true to draw back when she found that her heart could not be given with it. I had yielded to my fate, and while improving every opportunity to bask in her presence, I no more spoke of my love. But this glorious afternoon I found it hard to repress the promptings of my heart. She looked so happy, and all nature seemed so glad, that I could not bring myself to feel that I was a finally rejected lover. The novelty and delight of my position made me again to doubt the reality of it all, and looking into her eyes that beamed as tender as the blue sky above us, I said, "This must be heaven materialized and modernized." "If so, then a good many features were eliminated in the process," replied my fair companion. "I care not what is lacking, so long as that feature which makes it heaven be here," I said, looking straight into her deep brown eyes. "And pray, what is that?" she asked. "The angelic? But for the testimony of the good book which records that he was cast out, I would be tempted to retort that Lucifer is also in evidence," she replied, blushing and laughing. "His was a sad fate," said I, "but not so sad as mine, for he was shut out forever from the sight of the bliss from which he had lost, while I, alas, must endure the double grief of losing what is more than heaven to me, and then seeing another enjoy what I have lost." She blushed deeply and dropped her eyes before my ardent gaze, and then turning her head looked away toward the blue hills that broke the northern horizon. "After all," she said, and speaking as much to herself as to me, "after all, the Christian philosophy teaches that the real heaven and true, the peace which is above all earthly passion, is as much the fruit of sacrifice as of love." And turning her eyes full upon me, "Perverse and impulsive as I am sometimes, I yet believe that I am capable of suffering rather than that I should be the wilful cause of suffering in another." I began vehemently to protest against any philosophy that would make two people miserable for the chance of making one happy, when my ear caught the sound of a wavering melody above us, which seemed to come down from heaven itself. "Hark! What is that sweet sound?" My companion listened a moment, and then her face clouded. "Don't you know? that is Professor Hallam and his Aeolian harp following us. Let's dip." And jerking the steering fan with all her force, we flew down an aerial incline 500 feet or more with such velocity as almost to take my breath. In making these dips or downward glides, only a slight inclination is necessary to send the aeroplane whizzing through the air with the speed of an arrow. But my companion, either with reckless abandon or by accident, threw our machine down almost to an angle of 45 degrees, and when, at the bottom of the incline, the head was thrown up to make it leap into the air again, the great aeroplane bellied upward with a strain that made the frame bend and quiver, and then with a report like the crack of a pistol, it burst almost from end to end, and seeming to shudder for a moment, began to drop toward the earth. In this moment of deadly peril, I believe that all that was best and noblest in me asserted itself, and like a flash it occurred to me that the rent canvas, while not sufficient to bear up two, would probably drop gently enough with one to avoid fatal consequences. With the thought came the resolve, and in less than a second after the aeroplane began to fall, I had thrown loose the strap that bound me to my seat, and rising upon the pedal, leaned over until my lips almost touched the blanched face of the woman I loved, and shouted, for the whipping of the rent canvas made a noise like that of a hurricane. "It is death for one, and I love you, and can die for you." "Then let it be death for both," she cried, letting go of the bar and throwing both arms around my neck with a vice-like grip. "For I love you and cannot live without you." One kiss, oh my darling, pressing my lips to hers with a thrill that made me to forget the peril of death, and then throwing myself forward, dropped from the pedal. But the fair arms about my neck were strong, and though I struggled to break loose, knowing that the velocity at which we were falling meant certain death for both of us, they held me fast. Down, down we fell with a quivering, fluttering motion like a winged bird dropping to earth, and choked to blindness and suffocation, I was expecting to feel the impact that would crush us against the ground, when I became dimly conscious of a fierce shrieking sound above us, and then our downward motion seemed to be arrested. A moment later we struck the earth with a shock that seemed to break every bone in my body. With a great wave of thankfulness I realized that we were saved, and disengaging the fair arms that still wound around my neck like bands of steel, I struggled to my feet, and hastily unbuckling the strap that bound the beautiful form of my heart's idol to the wrecked machine, dragged her fainting from under the aeroplane. My first concern was to ascertain if she were killed or injured, and laying her gently on the grass, I found to my unspeakable joy that she was alive and bore no marks of injury. Loosing the close-fitting bodice at the throat that might breathe more freely, and fanning her vigorously with my handkerchief, I was rewarded in a few moments by seeing her open her eyes, and look up at me with an expression of an inexpressible tenderness. "Oh, my love," she said, holding up her hands to me. "Then you would indeed have died for me." "A thousand times," I cried rapturously, seizing her hands and covering them with kisses. "Now you shall be mine forever and ever." "No, no, it cannot be!" she exclaimed hastily, withdrawing her hands and springing to her feet. "What does this mean?" running back to the aeroplane with an expression of terror. I followed her and saw with astonishment that another aeroplane was foul with ours and lay upon it. "What indeed?" I cried, seizing the end of it and lifting it up. "Oh, can't you see that it is Professor Hallam's? Don't you see his harp? Oh, my God!" And with a shuddering cry of horror, she covered her face with her hands and fell upon her knees, moaning and crying. Then it dawned upon me that the noble man had swooped down and, attaching his machine to ours, had thrown himself to death to save our lives. Leaving the weeping woman, I ran to a group of people who had gathered some little distance away, and were talking and gesticulating wildly, and there, crushed and dead, lay the noblest man and greatest genius that ever lived. In his godlike nobility of soul, he had caught our aeroplane several hundred feet above the earth, and seeing that it could not sustain all and prevent us from being crushed against the earth, he had thrown himself down to a horrible death, that his affianced might escape with his rival. I wonder not that at last, when earthly passion had been chilled by the cold touch of death, and the dross of mortality scarce intervened, that it was of him she thought, that it was the wondrous melody of his nocturne that she heard above the roaring of the frozen sea rolling down from the beyond ere she passed. And I felt no pang of jealousy. If in the house of many mansions, where there is no marrying and giving in marriage, but all are as the angels of God in love and purity, I may be accounted worthy of the humblest station in their sphere, I shall be content. And yet she loved me, and not him. Kneeling by him, I raised the noble head, and chafed the poor broken hands that held within them the potency of such divine harmony as the world will never hear again. But the great soul had passed. Death was doubtless instantaneous, for though his face was unmarred, his body was horribly crushed and broken. Dispatching one of the bystanders to convey intelligence of the accidents to the city, I went back and raised the weeping girl who was to have been the dead man's wife. "My darling," I said, lifting her gently, "you would have been true to him, and he was a godlike man and worthy of your truth. But surely the hand of Providence is in this terrible thing. Will you go and look upon him?" Taking my arm without speaking, I led her to where our Savior lay upon the ground, and with a solemn grace and dignity that was really majestic, she walked around to the dead man's feet and looked long and calmly at his face. "Thou wert too pure and great to be loved as a man," she spoke at last, "and in the presence of thy dead clay I feel as unworthy as Guinevere at the feet of the pure and royal Arthur. Alas! the world has lost its greatest spirit, and I a friend of whom I could never be worthy." Then as I led her away, "Oh, my Launcelot, thou art not and never can be so good or great a man, and yet I love you." And that is the end of today's chapter. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one down below. If you like my work and would like to become a channel member, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. Or you can just click on it right on my channel page. And I hope you have a great day.